What if I told you that the demon of greed has been living inside your mind, whispering in your ear every time you check your bank account, every time you scroll through social media, envying someone else's lifestyle, every time you feel that gnawing emptiness that you try to fill with just one more purchase? His name is Mammon, and today we're going deep into the psychology behind one of history's most misunderstood entities. Now, before you click away thinking this is just another occult video, stay with me. Whether you believe in demons or not, what Mammon represents is something profoundly psychological, something that affects every single one of us in ways we don't even realize. This isn't about summoning spirits or drawing pentagrams. This is about understanding the dark psychology of desire and greed, and how an ancient archetype reveals truths about human nature that modern psychology is only beginning to fully comprehend. Let's start with who Mammon actually is. In the Lesser Key of Solomon, a grimoire dating back to the 17th century, Mammon appears as one of the 72 demons of the Goetia. But here's where it gets interesting. Unlike other demons who promise power, knowledge, or supernatural abilities, Mammon's entire existence revolves around one thing: wealth. He is described as the demon who can reveal hidden treasures, make people greedy, and bind humans to material possessions. He's not just a demon of money, though. He's the personification of greed itself, the living embodiment of that insatiable hunger for more that never quite gets satisfied, no matter how much you accumulate. But Mammon's story doesn't start in medieval grimoires. The word Mammon appears in the Bible, specifically in the New Testament, where Jesus says you cannot serve both God and Mammon. Even back then, Mammon wasn't described as a being with horns and a tail. It was a concept, a force, a personification of material wealth and the corruption it brings to the human soul. Over centuries, this concept evolved, became more concrete, more anthropomorphized, until Mammon took his place among the ranks of hell's nobility in demonological texts. In the Lesser Key of Solomon, Mammon is associated with temptation and corruption. He doesn't drag you into sin through violence or force. No, his method is far more insidious. He works through your own desires, amplifying that little voice in your head that says you deserve more, you need more, you're not enough without more. And this is where the psychology gets absolutely fascinating. Think about how greed operates in the human mind. It's not just about wanting money or possessions. Greed is a psychological state that fundamentally alters how we perceive reality. When you're caught in greed's grip, nothing is ever enough. You could have millions in the bank, a mansion, luxury cars, but there's always someone with more, always something else to acquire, always that next level to reach. This is what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill. You achieve one goal, get that rush of satisfaction, and then almost immediately, your baseline returns to normal, and you need something bigger, better, more expensive to feel that same high. Mammon understood this thousands of years before modern psychology put a name to it. He doesn't just offer wealth. He offers the promise that wealth will finally make you happy, complete you, and fill that void inside you. And that's the trap. Because of that void, it can't be filled with external things. It's psychological, existential even. But Mammon, or rather, the psychological force that Mammon represents, convinces you otherwise. Let's talk about how this actually manifests in real life. You're scrolling through Instagram, and you see someone living what looks like a perfect life. Designer clothes, exotic vacations, a beautiful home. Something stirs inside you. It's not quite envy, not quite desire, but a mixture of both. You start thinking about your own life, your own possessions, and suddenly they seem lacking. This is Mammon's whisper in the modern age. Social media has become his temple, the endless scroll his ritual, and comparison his sacrament. Studies in social psychology have shown that constant exposure to curated lifestyles on social media significantly increases feelings of inadequacy and materialism. We start measuring our worth not by our character, relationships, or contributions to the world, but by our ability to display wealth and status. We become what the sociologist Thorstein Veblen called conspicuous consumers, people who purchase and display goods primarily to signal status rather than for their actual utility. But here's what makes this psychological pattern so powerful and so dangerous. Greed, unlike other human drives, has no natural endpoint. If you're hungry, you eat until you're full. If you're tired, you sleep until you're rested. But greed? Greed has no satiation point. No amount of money feels like enough because the goalposts keep moving. You think if you just had $50,000 saved, you'd feel secure. Then you get it, and suddenly, 100,000 seems like the real target. Then it's 1 million. Then 10 million. The number doesn't matter because the underlying psychology remains the same. This is what the ancients understood when they personified greed as a demon. They recognized that this wasn't just a normal human desire that could be satisfied. This was something that possessed people, that took control of their decision-making, that made them sacrifice relationships, health, integrity, everything, in pursuit of something that could never truly satisfy them. In psychological terms, we might call this an obsessive-compulsive pattern or an addiction. The mechanism is remarkably similar to substance addiction. There's the initial high, the crash, the craving for more, the escalating tolerance where you need more and more to feel the same effect. Now, the Lesser Key of Solomon provides specific descriptions of how to summon and bind demons like Mammon. But let's translate that into psychological language. What does it actually mean to summon the demon of greed? It means you've allowed this pattern to take hold in your psyche. Maybe it started innocently enough. You wanted financial security, which is perfectly reasonable. But somewhere along the line, security transformed into accumulation for its own sake. The means became the end. Money stopped being a tool and became the goal itself. And here's the really tricky part. Our entire economic system is built on this principle. Capitalism, particularly in its modern form, requires constant growth, constant consumption, and constant desire for more. We're encouraged from birth to want more, to never be satisfied, to always be striving for the next purchase, the next upgrade, the next level of success. In this sense, we're living in a world where Mammon doesn't need to be summoned. He's already here, woven into the fabric of our society, our institutions, our very way of life. Think about advertising. What is advertising if not a systematic attempt to create desire where none existed before? To make you feel inadequate, so you'll purchase a product that promises to complete you? Every commercial, every billboard, every sponsored post is essentially a ritual invocation of Mammon's energy, creating and amplifying greed in the collective psyche. And it works because it's tapping into something deep in human psychology, something the ancients recognized and tried to warn us about through their stories of demons and damnation. But let's go deeper. Why are humans so susceptible to greed in the first place? Evolutionary psychology offers some insights. In our ancestral environment, resources were scarce and unpredictable. Having more food stored, more tools, and more resources increased your survival odds and your reproductive success. The desire to accumulate served an adaptive function. But here's the problem. Our brains evolved in an environment of scarcity, but many of us now live in an environment of abundance. That drive to accumulate doesn't turn off just because you have enough. Your Stone Age brain doesn't understand that you have more than sufficient resources. It just keeps signaling, get more, store more, you might need it later. This creates a fundamental mismatch between our evolved psychology and our modern environment. We're running ancient software on modern hardware, so to speak, and Mammon, as an archetypal force, exploits this vulnerability perfectly. He's not creating something new in us. He's amplifying something that was already there, turning a once adaptive trait into a compulsive, life-destroying obsession. There's also a deeper existential dimension to greed that we need to explore. The philosopher Eric Fromm argued that in modern capitalist societies, we try to resolve our existential anxiety, our fear of death and meaninglessness, through having rather than being. We think if we accumulate enough stuff, enough wealth, enough status symbols, will somehow become more real, more substantial, more permanent. We're trying to build a fortress against mortality out of material possessions. But of course, it doesn't work. You can't solve an existential problem with material solutions. Death comes for the rich and poor alike, and when it does, all those accumulated possessions mean nothing. This is what spiritual traditions have been saying for millennia. Jesus' warning about mammon wasn't just moral instruction. It was psychological insight. When you serve mammon, when you make wealth your primary focus, you're attempting to find meaning in something that fundamentally cannot provide it. You're worshiping at a false altar, as the religious language would put it. In psychological terms, you're investing your sense of identity and purpose in something external and ultimately empty, which inevitably leads to a feeling of hollowness and dissatisfaction, no matter how much you accumulate. The Lesser Key of Solomon describes various demons as having different ranks and powers. Mammon is sometimes depicted as a high-ranking demon, a king or president of hell, commanding numerous legions. Psychologically, we can interpret this as the power and influence that greed has over human behavior. It's not a minor vice. It's a fundamental corrupter that can reshape entire personalities, families, and societies. How many relationships have been destroyed by conflicts over money? How many people have compromised their values, their integrity, their very souls for financial gain? How many wars, how much suffering, how much environmental destruction can be traced back to this single psychological force? And here's something that might make you uncomfortable. You might be thinking, well, I'm not greedy. I'm not obsessed with money. I'm just trying to be comfortable, to be secure. But Mammon is subtle. He doesn't always appear as obvious, cartoonish greed. Sometimes he disguises himself as prudence, as responsibility, as just being practical. How do you know where healthy financial planning ends and greed begins? When does saving for the future become hoarding? When does wanting nice things become materialism? These are questions worth seriously examining in yourself. One way to identify Mammon's influence in your life is to notice what you sacrifice in pursuit of wealth. Are you sacrificing time with loved ones to work more hours? Are you sacrificing your health, your stress levels, your peace of mind? Are you making ethical compromises, small ones at first, telling yourself it's necessary? It's just business. Everyone does it? These are warning signs. These are the ways Mammon slowly binds you, gradually getting you to trade away the things that actually matter for the promise of security or luxury that always seems just out of reach. There's a fascinating psychological phenomenon called loss aversion. Research shows that people feel the pain of losing something about twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. This means that once you have wealth or possessions, you become psychologically attached to them in a way that's stronger than the pleasure they initially brought you. You're not just pursuing more anymore. You're desperately trying not to lose what you have. This creates a prison. You're trapped by your own accumulation, constantly anxious about protecting it, growing it, not losing it. Mammon doesn't even need to promise you more at this point. The fear of loss keeps you enslaved. This is why you see wealthy people with more money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes, still obsessively focused on making more. It's not rational. It's compulsive. It's the psychological pattern that Mammon represents in full bloom. And the tragedy is that in this state, you're unable to enjoy what you have. You're always looking ahead to the next acquisition, the next milestone, unable to be present, unable to experience genuine contentment. Now, let's talk about the shadow side of all this. In Jungian psychology, the shadow represents the aspects of ourselves we deny, reject, or refuse to acknowledge. Greed is often a shadow element for many people. We don't want to see ourselves as greedy. We rationalize, we justify, we tell ourselves stories about why our desire for more is different, more legitimate than other people's greed. But this denial actually gives the pattern more power. What we don't acknowledge, we can't integrate or transform. The Lesser Key of Solomon talks about binding demons, controlling them through ritual and will. Psychologically, this is about bringing shadow elements into consciousness, acknowledging them, understanding them, and integrating them rather than being controlled by them. You can't defeat Mammon by pretending he's not there or that he doesn't influence you. You defeat him by seeing clearly how the pattern operates, by recognizing its voice when it speaks, by consciously choosing differently. This brings us to an important question. Is all desire for wealth bad? Is money itself corrupting? Not necessarily. The issue isn't money. The issue is the relationship you have with money. Money is a tool, a form of stored energy and potential. It can be used for tremendous good. It can provide security, freedom, the ability to help others, to fund meaningful projects, and to reduce suffering. The problem arises when money becomes the master instead of the servant, when it shifts from being a means to being an end, when your sense of self becomes entangled with your net worth. There's a concept in Buddhist psychology called attachment. Attachment isn't the same as preference or desire. Attachment is when your happiness becomes dependent on external circumstances, when you can only feel okay if things are a certain way. Applied to wealth, this means you're attached to money when your peace of mind requires a certain bank balance, when your self-worth rises and falls with market fluctuations, and when you identify yourself with your financial status. This is Mammon's true power, not making you want money, but making you think you are what you own. Let me share something that might shift your perspective. There have been numerous studies on lottery winners, people who suddenly come into enormous wealth. You'd think they'd be ecstatic, their problems solved, living in bliss. But the research shows something different. After an initial period of euphoria, most lottery winners return to roughly the same level of happiness they had before winning. Many report increased anxiety, damaged relationships, and loss of purpose. Some end up worse off than they started. Why? Because external circumstances, including wealth, have a surprisingly limited impact on sustained happiness. The psychological patterns you had before the money don't disappear with the money. If anything, they often intensify. This is why ancient wisdom traditions emphasized internal development over external accumulation. They understood that happiness, meaning, fulfillment, these come from who you are, not what you have. Mammon's great lie is that it's the other way around, that you need to have before you can be. But the truth is precisely the opposite. You need to cultivate being, to develop your character, your relationships, your sense of purpose, and then having becomes much less important. It might still be nice, still be useful, but it's not the source of your identity or your happiness. So how do we break free from Mammon's grip? How do we, in the language of the grimoire, banish this demon from our lives? First, you have to recognize the pattern. You have to see clearly how greed operates in your own mind. Notice when you're pursuing money or possessions to fill an emotional void. Notice when you're comparing yourself to others and feeling inadequate. Notice when you're sacrificing things that truly matter for things that ultimately don't. Awareness is the first step. Second, you need to cultivate what psychologists call intrinsic values over extrinsic values. Intrinsic values are inherently meaningful things, like personal growth, relationships, contributing to something larger than yourself, creativity, and autonomy. Extrinsic values are things valued for what they can get you, like money, status, image, and power over others. Research consistently shows that people who prioritize intrinsic values report higher levels of well-being, while those focused on extrinsic values tend to be more anxious, depressed, and dissatisfied, even when they're successful in achieving those extrinsic goals. Third, practice gratitude. I know it sounds cliché, but there's solid psychological research behind this. Gratitude fundamentally shifts your focus from what you lack to what you have, from scarcity to abundance. When you're genuinely grateful for what you already possess, the compulsive drive for more loses its power. You're interrupting the psychological pattern that Mammon represents. You're choosing contentment over constant striving. Fourth, examine your relationship with consumption. Before making a purchase, especially a significant one, pause and ask yourself why you want it. Are you trying to impress someone? Are you trying to fill an emotional need? Are you genuinely going to use this, or does it just look good? This isn't about becoming a minimalist monk. although that path works for some people. It's about bringing consciousness to choices that are often made unconsciously, driven by psychological forces you're not aware of. Fifth, and this is crucial, invest in experiences and relationships rather than possessions. There's robust psychological research showing that experiential purchases, things like travel, concerts, and learning new skills, bring more lasting satisfaction than material purchases. In relationships, deep, authentic connections with other people are consistently the strongest predictor of human happiness across cultures and time periods. Mammon tries to isolate you, to make you compete with others, to view relationships transactionally. Resist this. Prioritize people over possessions. Now, here's something the Lesser Key of Solomon understood that modern psychology is rediscovering. Demons in these texts weren't just evil for evil's sake. Each demon represented a distortion of something potentially positive. Mammon represents the distortion of abundance, of the creative power to manifest and provide. In its undistorted form, the energy that Mammon represents could be used for genuine provision, for creating security, for generosity, for building things of value. It's only when this energy becomes compulsive, when it's pursued for its own sake without a higher purpose, that it becomes demonic. This suggests that the goal isn't to eliminate the desire for resources or comfort. That would be neither realistic nor desirable. The goal is integration and balance. You acknowledge the need for security, for comfort, for the ability to enjoy life's pleasures. But you keep these desires in their proper place. They serve you and your values. They don't define you. They don't control you. Money becomes what it should be, a tool, a form of energy you can direct toward meaningful purposes, rather than a tyrant demanding constant sacrifice. There's a concept in alchemy, which heavily influenced texts like the Lesser Key of Solomon, called transmutation. The idea was that base metals could be transformed into gold through the right processes. Psychologically, this is about transforming shadow elements, including greed, into their higher expressions. You take that driving energy, that desire for more, and you transmute it. Instead of more money, you pursue more wisdom. Instead of more possessions, you cultivate more presence. Instead of more status, you develop more authenticity. The energy doesn't disappear. It gets redirected toward genuinely fulfilling aims. Let's address something that might be bothering you. In a world where financial survival often requires participating in systems built on greed, how realistic is it to transcend Mammon's influence? If you don't play the game, you might end up homeless, unable to support yourself or your family. This is a genuine tension, and I'm not going to pretend there are easy answers. Living ethically in an unethical system requires compromise and nuance. But here's the thing. Even within systemic constraints, you have more choice than you might think. You can choose not to define yourself by your income or net worth. You can choose to set boundaries around work so it doesn't consume your entire life. You can choose to be generous even with limited resources. You can choose to find meaning and purpose beyond the economic. You can choose to recognize when you have enough and resist the constant pressure to want more. These choices, these small acts of resistance against Mammon's psychological grip, they matter. They keep you human. They keep you free. The Lesser Key of Solomon, like all grimoires, is ultimately a map of the human psyche projected outward as angels and demons, divine and infernal forces. When you understand this, these ancient texts become incredibly relevant psychological documents. They're describing the actual forces, the actual patterns that shape human behavior and consciousness. Mammon is real, not as a literal demon with horns and a pitchfork, but as a genuine psychological and cultural force that has shaped human history and continues to shape your individual choices every single day. And here's the truly unsettling part. Mammon is getting stronger. Our technology, our global economic systems, our media, everything is designed to amplify this pattern. You're being constantly bombarded with messages designed to create desire, dissatisfaction, and the feeling that you need more. It's harder than ever to resist because the manipulation has become so sophisticated, so pervasive. But this also means it's more important than ever to understand these patterns, to see them clearly, to make conscious choices about what you value and who you want to be. So what do you do with all this information? How do you actually apply it? Start with honest self-examination. Look at your own relationship with money and possessions. Where in your life is Mammon's influence showing up? What are you sacrificing in pursuit of wealth or status? Where are you measuring your worth by external metrics? Where are you caught in the hedonic treadmill, never quite satisfied, always needing more? Don't judge yourself harshly for what you find. These patterns are deeply embedded in our culture and our psychology. Just see them clearly, then start making small changes. Maybe you spend less time on social media to reduce exposure to comparison and manufactured desire. Maybe you practice gratitude daily, genuinely appreciating what you already have. Maybe you invest more time in relationships and experiences rather than accumulation. Maybe you set a financial goal that represents enough, and when you reach it, you focus on other areas of life rather than constantly moving the goalposts. Maybe you can examine your purchases more carefully, bringing awareness to why you're really buying something. These small practices, done consistently, can fundamentally shift your relationship with greed and materialism. Remember, the goal isn't perfection. You're not trying to become some enlightened being with no desires or preferences. You're human. You live in a material world. You need resources to survive and thrive. That's okay. What you're working toward is freedom, the freedom to choose your relationship with wealth rather than having it choose for you. The freedom to recognize Mammon's voice when he speaks and consciously decide whether to listen. The freedom to base your identity and your happiness on something more substantial and lasting than your bank balance or your possessions. The ancient grimoires taught that demons could be summoned but also banished, bound but also released, negotiated with but never fully trusted. This is perfect psychological wisdom. The greedy part of yourself isn't going to disappear, but it doesn't have to run your life. You can acknowledge it, understand it, even work with its energy when appropriate, while keeping it in its proper place. You can be the master of your desires rather than their slave. One more thing I want you to consider. What if the real treasure Mammon guards isn't wealth at all? What if, as in many myths and fairy tales, the treasure is actually something else entirely? In the stories, the hero often has to defeat or outwit a dragon or demon guarding treasure. But the real treasure turns out to be wisdom, transformation, and self-knowledge. What if working through your relationship with greed, with Mammon, is actually the path to discovering what you truly value, what really matters to you, who you really are beneath all the conditioning and cultural messaging? This reframe changes everything. Suddenly, Mammon isn't just an enemy to be defeated. He's a teacher, showing you through contrast what authentic value looks like. He's a challenge, an obstacle that, when overcome, makes you stronger, wiser, freer. This is the deeper meaning embedded in all these demon stories. They're initiation narratives. You have to face the demon, which really means facing that aspect of yourself, to integrate it and move forward on your path of development. So let me ask you this. What would your life look like if you were completely free from Mammon's influence? If money were just a tool you used but didn't define you? If you could be content with enough rather than always needing more? If you measured your worth by your character, your relationships, your contributions, rather than your net worth? If you could see through advertising and social comparison and all the other mechanisms that create artificial desire? What would change? How would you spend your time differently? What relationships would you prioritize? What would you pursue? This vision, this image of a life free from greed's compulsion, this is your North Star. This is what you're working toward. Now I want to hear from you. How do you see Mammon's influence showing up in your own life? What's your biggest struggle when it comes to greed, materialism, or the constant pressure to want more? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And here's a challenge for you. For the next week, before you buy anything non-essential, pause and ask yourself why you really want it. What need are you trying to fill? You might be surprised by what you discover about yourself. Look, I know this has been heavy. We've gone deep into some uncomfortable psychological territory. But here's why this matters. You have one life, one shot at this human experience. You can spend it chasing after things that will never satisfy you, serving mammon, letting greed slowly consume your time, your relationships, your peace of mind. Or you can wake up, see the pattern clearly, and choose something different. You can choose meaning over accumulation, being over having, authentic values over cultural programming. This choice, this is your real power. This is your freedom. The Lesser Key of Solomon is just one map, one way of understanding these psychological forces that shape human life. But the fundamental insight remains true across cultures and centuries. There are forces within you and within your society that, if left unexamined, will control you. Greed is one of the most powerful of these forces, but awareness is the antidote. Consciousness breaks the spell. When you see mammon clearly, when you understand how the pattern operates, you reclaim your choice. You reclaim your life. So take what resonates from this deep dive. Leave what doesn't. But please, examine your relationship with wealth and possessions honestly. It might be the most important psychological work you ever done. Because on the other side of that examination, on the other side of breaking free from mammon's grip, there's a life of genuine contentment, authentic purpose, and real freedom waiting for you. If this video opened your eyes to something you hadn't considered before, do me a favor. Hit that like button. It helps more people discover this content and start their own journey of understanding these deep psychological patterns. And if you want more explorations into the psychology behind ancient wisdom, mythology, and the hidden forces that shape human behavior, subscribe to the channel. We're just getting started on this journey into the depths of the human psyche, and I promise you, it only gets more fascinating from here. Until next time, stay conscious, stay free, and remember, you are not your bank account. You are so much more.